Have you ever looked at a childhood photo and suddenly felt that the person in it wasn't you? Not the kind of wow, I look so different, but that strange, spine-chilling feeling, like someone had taken your face, printed it out, and pasted it onto someone else's memory. Welcome back to Family Ashes, where family secrets aren't just told, they're peeled back, layer by layer, until only the raw core remains. Today's story isn't about a petty dinner argument or a harmless childhood lie. This is the story of a life bent out of shape from the very beginning, arranged and scripted like a movie, except I'm the one cast into a role I never chose. If you've ever had a moment when you questioned whether you truly belong to the place called family, I think you'll understand. Hit subscribe to follow me to the very edge of a truth I may have spent my whole life avoiding. My name is Olivia Harper. I'm 32, I live in Chicago, and I'm an interior designer, the kind of job that forces you to put everything in its right place, balanced, harmonious, logical. Ironically, my own life is the one thing that has never had any clear structure. Ethan, my fiancé, is a photographer, the kind of person who sees what others miss, both in light and in people. Maybe that's why I brought him home this year. I needed an outsider's eyes. Someone who didn't grow up in the suffocating politeness of holiday dinners filled with smiles but no air. We drove out to the western suburbs of Chicago, where my adoptive parents, Linda and Robert Harper, live in a house that always smells faintly of scented candles and unspoken things. Hannah, my sister, is the same as always, beautiful, composed, and the glowing center of every compliment in the room. Every year at Christmas, we gather here, eat the same food, retell the same stories, laugh the same laughs, and pretend not to notice that something between me and this family has never quite fit. But this year was different. I didn't know that when I walked into that house, everything I'd ever called the past would begin to fall apart, because of a few old photographs and a furrowed brow from the man I love. I don't quite remember which Christmas my mother started that habit, bringing out the photo albums after dessert, like we had nothing left to talk about except the past. But every year, without fail, like a ritual built into the floorboards, she would disappear after the last round of laughter at the dinner table, then return holding that old plastic box, the one so faded the lid no longer snapped shut. I just happened to find these while cleaning the closet, she always said, exactly the same way, even though I knew perfectly well they were neatly stored in the third drawer on the left, wrapped carefully in an ivory tablecloth no one used anymore. I honestly can't remember the last time I believed she just happened upon them. She set the box down on the coffee table in the middle of the living room, popped open the lid, and pulled out 3 photo albums whose smudged ink stains I had long since memorized. Hannah, as always, perked up instantly, grabbed a throw pillow and scooted closer like she was about to watch the highlight reel of her life. My dad just lifted his glass of whiskey, didn't look at anyone, like he was waiting for it all to be over. And me? I just sat still, leaning back slightly, holding a glass of red wine I hadn't touched, eyes fixed forward but mind drifting somewhere else entirely. Ethan sat next to me, one arm resting lightly along the back of the chair, the other on his knee. He didn't say anything, he rarely did in groups, but he noticed everything. The eyes of a photographer are always busy, parsing light, framing, and something deeper that most people miss. I brought him with me like a lifeline, a grounding force, someone not entangled in the thick, unreadable fabric of my childhood. I didn't expect him to be the one to unearth what I had buried so carefully. My mom opened the first album, pictures of Hannah as a newborn, our family trip to Yosemite, me in a princess dress I had sewn myself, the stitches atrociously uneven. Everyone laughed. I pretended to laugh along. Ethan didn't. I could feel it in his eyes, in the subtle shift of his breath, he was noticing something else. Still polite, still nodding at my mother's stories, but his fingers started tapping the table lightly, rhythmically, like a countdown clock ticking towards something inevitable. The second album was opened, photos of me, from around ages 3 to 5, the section my mom always liked best because it was easy to narrate, easy to remember, and apparently harmless. 1 page, 2 pages, then came the third, there it was, a photo of me standing in front of a moss-covered stone wall, wearing a pale pink coat, clutching a teddy bear. A photo I'd seen 100 times and never questioned. But this time Ethan froze. I saw it instantly. His body, normally fluid, relaxed, suddenly went still, like someone who just heard the screech of brakes on a runway. He leaned in closer, eyes locked on the photo, brow furrowing slightly, lips pressed tight. No one else noticed, except me. I leaned toward him, about to whisper and ask what was wrong. But before I could speak, his hand found mine under the table and squeezed so tightly I had to look up. Ethan wasn't looking at me. His eyes were still glued to the album, and his voice came out in a low, almost strangled whisper, just loud enough for me to hear. Don't you see it? The person in that photo isn't you. I went still. Not because I believed him immediately, but because of how he said it. It wasn't doubt. It was certainty. The kind that doesn't need an explanation. I turned back to the photo. It was me. And yet, not quite. Something felt off. The expression was too perfect. The way the light fell on the cheek didn't match the sun's direction. My eyes, or the eyes of me, weren't looking straight at the lens but slightly off, as if staring at something outside the frame. The photo looked real, but it didn't feel right. I almost laughed it off, meant to say he was imagining things, but the words never came. My mother kept flipping the pages, telling the story about how I once played with dirt and pretended to bake cookies in the backyard, but I couldn't hear her anymore. Everything around me faded, replaced by the sound of my heartbeat pounding in my ears. And Ethan's eyes, locked on me like he knew I was about to fall. I never asked Ethan why he took the photos, and I don't remember exactly when he did it. Maybe it was while my mom was deep into retelling a story, one she never told the same way twice, and everyone's attention was fixed on Hannah, laughing out loud at some silly old picture. And Ethan, as always, quieter than everyone, but somehow always certain of exactly what he was looking at. We got home late, a thin layer of snow already dusting the windshield. I hadn't said a word since we left my parents' house. Not because I was angry or sad, but because a part of me was waiting for Ethan to speak first. But he didn't. He just took off his coat, opened his bag, and pulled out a small stack of photos clipped together with a silver binder clip. I saw the first 3, and my heart skipped a beat. They were pictures of me, or rather, of me as a child, in a park, in front of a white fence, standing next to an old waterspout. Photos I'd seen since I was little, trusted, even told stories about with a mix of quiet pride and softness, like my past had once been a little charming, a little normal. Look closely, Ethan said, his voice light as air slipping through a crack in the window. I picked up each photo. At first, they felt familiar. But then I started noticing. The exact same tilt of the head. The same smile, unchanging. The eyes in all 3 photos looking in the same direction, at the same slight angle, just enough to seem natural if you only glanced once. But side by side, the sameness was uncanny. No child repeats the same expression, gaze, and posture as if they've been copy-pasted into different settings. No child casts the exact same shadow under their chin in 3 different places, in 3 different years. Unless someone deliberately made it that way. I looked at Ethan. He nodded slowly, as if to confirm the fear rising in my eyes was valid. I turned to the next one. Another girl, a blonde, lighter skin, different bone structure. At first glance, she looked like me. But now I knew she wasn't. Ethan pointed at the photo and said softly, I think this is the original. The others were edited. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Something inside me was breaking, a crack stretching through decades, running straight through memories I once thought were mine. Suddenly, I remembered something that had once seemed harmless. I was 14, walking past the dining room, and saw my mother sitting in front of her laptop. The light from the screen lit her face in a way that made her look completely different, like someone caught in the middle of something they shouldn't be doing. Her eyes were locked on the screen, where a Facebook message had popped up in a language I didn't recognize at the time, some alphabet I couldn't read, with a red heart at the end. I asked who it was from. She startled, closed the laptop, and said quickly, just spam. Then she stood up, her hands clearly trembling, and never mentioned it again. I didn't ask either. Because I was used to not asking. Because I'd been taught that some things shouldn't be brought up, if you wanted to keep everything peaceful. Peaceful? No. That wasn't peace. That was silence. A kind of silence built out of fake photos, fake memories, and a kind of love I'm not even sure I ever really received. I thought of Hannah, how my mother would stroke her hair when she was sad, how my father laughed loudly every time she got an A. And me? I was the tough one, the one who didn't need coddling, the one who always took care of herself. Those words used to make me proud. Now they left only one thing: emptiness. And in that emptiness, I could hear myself breathing, short, quick, lost like a child wandering through a story that no longer belonged to her. I didn't sleep that night. Not the tossing and turning kind caused by caffeine or work stress, but the kind of sleeplessness where your body feels like it's sounding an internal alarm, like if you dared to close your eyes, something terrifying would rise up from underneath, from deep inside a memory you've spent your whole life burying. Ethan lay next to me, breathing evenly. I just lay there, eyes wide open in the dark, listening to my heartbeat pound like a distant knock that no one ever answers. And then, I started to dream. But it wasn't a dream, it was fragments of memory, long suppressed, coming back with such force they didn't knock. They crashed straight into my mind. A woman, her hair as golden as summer straw, bent down close to my face. Her voice hummed a melody in a language I didn't understand then, but now know was Russian. There were no words, just the tone, soft, round, gentle like a breath on a winter morning, scented with lemon peel and honey. I don't remember her name, don't recall her face clearly, but the feeling, warmth, tenderness, belonging, that feeling was unmistakable. And most importantly, it wasn't Linda. I jolted awake from the first dream around 3 a.m., cold sweat soaking the back of my shirt. My heart was still pounding hard enough to hurt, but I didn't dare close my eyes again. I was afraid that if I did, I'd see more of what I had forgotten. And I was right. The images didn't stop. By the next morning, I could no longer tell what was memory and what was delusion. That afternoon, I was washing my hands in the kitchen when a sharp chill shot from the base of my neck all the way down to my feet. Suddenly, I saw myself, small, maybe 4 or 5 years old, standing in the middle of the living room. I was crying. Loudly. Not a tantrum, but the guttural, broken sobs of a child ripped away from the place she once belonged. And I called out, not Mom, but Mama, in a different accent, foreign yet painfully familiar. Then Linda appeared. Her face darkened, her hand clamped tightly around my wrist, her voice colder than winter itself. Don't ever call that woman your mother again. If you do, you'll disappear forever. I didn't know if it had really happened or if I was imagining it. But when that sentence echoed in my head, sharp, clear, like an old knife that still cut, I knew I hadn't made it up. My body reacted before I could even process it. My heart raced. My hands shook. My mind spun, like I was being pulled under by a wave with no name. I collapsed onto the kitchen floor. Ethan rushed over in a panic, trying to steady me, but I flinched and backed away instinctively, like anyone touching me might cause me to break apart. I couldn't breathe. The air around me felt like it was closing in, my lungs clenching, the room spinning like a cyclone of uncontrollable memory. And then I did something I never thought I would do. I reached for my phone, my hands shaking so badly I entered the wrong passcode 3 times. I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Ethan was next to me, saying something to the dispatcher, but all I could hear was the ringing in my ears. It wasn't until the operator asked for the 3rd time that I finally managed to whisper a few words. I think I was kidnapped. When I was a child. A pause followed, one that stretched on like an entire century. Then the dispatcher's voice came back, lower, slower, calmer. Are you safe right now? I think so. I'm at home. But I remembered. I'm not their child. And saying it out loud, to someone who was actually listening, not like in a dream, not like a thought I was imagining, was the moment I knew everything had changed. For good. 2 days after the 911 call, just when I was starting to believe I could breathe normally again, there was a knock at the door. 3 knocks. Not urgent, not rushed, but measured and intentional. Ethan stepped in front of me, glanced through the peephole, then looked back at me. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. I knew who it was. I opened the door. Linda stood there, holding a brown paper bag from the organic grocery store 10 blocks from my apartment. The smell of buttery carrot soup drifted from the opening. My mother, the woman who once told me not to be dramatic when I had a 103-degree fever, was standing on my doorstep with the soup I used to like when I was little. Behind her was Robert, hands in his coat pockets, face blank, like he was here out of obligation, not concern. "Can we come in?" she asked, even though her feet had already crossed the threshold before I could nod. Ethan stepped back, standing beside me like a silent barrier. They sat on the couch like guests, polite, cautious, trying not to look around too much. Linda set the soup on the table like it was a peace offering, then clasped her hands tightly on her knees, her nails digging into her skin. "We heard, you contacted the police," she began, her voice softer than usual, almost hoarse. "I did the right thing," I said. "Nothing else. No explanation. No apology." She nodded, like she'd rehearsed this. "You are not our biological daughter," she said, as plainly as someone announcing that it might rain. The room was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming. My father cleared his throat, then continued for her. "Your biological mother was Russian. She was very young when she had you. She couldn't keep you." He paused. "In 1995, Russia wasn't safe. War. Chaos. She begged us to take you to the US. She thought it would be better." "And then?" I asked, my voice flat as frozen water. "You took me without papers? No documentation? You told no one? You kept no contact? You never told me anything? You just made up a story?" Linda reached for the necklace she always wore, a habit when she was nervous. "We thought it was best if you didn't remember. If you didn't know. We wanted you to feel like you belonged." "By editing photos?" Ethan cut in, his voice sharp. "Pasting her face into pictures that never happened? Faking a childhood just so you could tell tidy stories at holiday dinners?" Linda turned to me, eyes slightly wet, but I couldn't tell if it was emotion or just a physical reflex. "You used to cry every week, missing your birth mother. You called her name in your sleep. You were in pain. And then you started to forget. We thought, if you forgot, you'd be happier. We just wanted to keep you. Keep. Like keeping an object. Like keeping a doll." I took a deep breath. My hand tightened on my knee. "What's her name?" I asked. Linda looked at me, then at Robert. He did the thing he always did, rubbed his face like life was getting on his nerves. She hesitated. "You won't remember it," she whispered. "I'm asking for her name," I said, enunciating every word. A long pause. Then Robert exhaled hard, like releasing a part of the memory he never wanted to hold on to. "Anastasia Ivanova," he said. The name didn't sound familiar. It didn't bring anything back. But it carried a strange weight, like a missing piece of a map I never knew I'd lost. And when that name was spoken out loud, something in me shifted. Not an explosion. Not a collapse. Just a turning. Like I had finally managed to turn the key that had been stuck in the lock for far too long. I didn't ask them to stay. They didn't ask to. When the door closed behind them, Ethan placed a hand on my shoulder. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just stood there, alone in a room I knew too well, feeling, for the first time, completely estranged from everything I once believed was real. I thought I might get a little sleep after they left, but I didn't close my eyes. My body seemed to reject every basic biological need, as if the moment I dared to rest, the truth that had just been unearthed would evaporate from the world like a strange dream. I stayed planted on the couch, phone in hand, the glow of the screen reflecting off the ceiling like one of those jeweler's lamps used to test what's real and what's fake. Ethan pulled up a chair beside me, opened his laptop, and the look in his eyes made it clear, we weren't letting this go. We started with the little we had, the name Anastasia Ivanova, and the time period, sometime in the mid-90s, coming to the US from Russia, or trying to. Too vague. Too common. Duplicate names filled the screen like an endless spreadsheet. A gardener in Pennsylvania. A nurse who'd passed away in Texas. An old Instagram account inactive since 2016. But then, in the middle of all that noise, Ethan stopped. Look at this. A Facebook account. Basic layout. The profile photo was a woman in her early 50s, hair pulled back, no makeup, no filters, not even a smile. But the moment I saw her, I froze. Not because she looked like me, but because I looked like her. The cheekbones. The shape of the jawline. The eyes, even softened by age and framed with fine lines, held that same calm, unnerving gaze Ethan always said was Olivia's look when she doesn't trust anyone. I couldn't speak. I just sat there, screen glued to my face. Ethan typed a message, then paused, handing it to me to read. I'm Olivia Harper. I believe I might be your lost daughter. I read that message 3 times. Then I hit send. My finger trembled slightly after pressing the button, like a single message had the power to shift the order of the universe. We didn't expect a quick response. But less than 15 minutes later, the screen lit up. A reply. 1 line. Can we talk? I nodded almost involuntarily when Ethan suggested a video call. I don't remember whether I actually agreed or just sat there while he handled everything, clicking the button, adjusting the webcam, making sure the microphone worked. I wrapped a blanket around myself like temporary armor, but inside, my heart was pounding like someone was about to unlock a vault of forgotten data inside my head. And then her face appeared on the screen. A long pause settled over us. She looked at me. Her hand moved to cover her mouth. A small gesture, but enough for me to see her fingers trembling. Her cheeks were slightly wet, not with sobs or dramatic tears, just red eyes and a face trying to hold in decades of emotion. Then she spoke. Not in Russian, but in English, heavily accented, slow, deliberate. I wasn't sure when I got the message. But now that I see you, I know. I've seen your face in my dreams for 25 years. I couldn't speak. I didn't dare break the moment that had wrapped around me like a blanket, both warm and full of thorns. Ethan placed his hand gently on my back. And then she said it. A name. Not Olivia. Irina, she whispered. Irina Ivanova. That name didn't trigger any specific memory. No image. No sound. But it made my heart tighten. As if, for the first time in my life, I had just heard my name said the way it was always meant to be. We didn't call it a reunion. No one used that word. It wasn't like the movies, there was no quiet soundtrack swelling as mother and daughter embraced in golden light pouring through a window. We just looked at each other through a screen, in 2 rooms over 1,000 miles apart, and let the silence speak first. I don't remember whether I started asking questions or if she began telling the story on her own. I just remember the first thing she said after calling me by my real name, Irina, was a confession. I didn't give you to them. She lifted her head, eyes steady on mine. I didn't abandon you. I held my breath, waiting for what came next. And then she began. That year, I was 5. She, Anastasia, was in the final stages of applying for resettlement through a humanitarian immigration program. Families with small children were given priority. She said getting on the list wasn't easy, but she had made it. The paperwork was nearly complete. Only one appointment remained, an official meeting at the city office. A final step. She didn't want to take me with her in the bitter cold and chaos, where people shoved each other in hallways and waited for hours just to sign a form. She asked the neighbors to watch me, a young American couple renting the apartment next door. They had helped out a few times before. Smiled warmly. Brought over apples, bread. A woman with a voice sweet as honey and a man who nodded a lot but whose eyes were always shifting. Linda and Robert Harper. I was gone less than 2 hours, she said, her voice going hoarse. When I came back, the apartment was empty. No suitcases. No belongings. No child. Nothing. I felt a chill run from the base of my neck down my spine. Some part of me still wanted to believe this was a mistake, an accident. But when she kept speaking, I knew there was nothing left to doubt. I went everywhere, she continued. Police stations. Refugee camps. Community centers. I printed flyers. Pinned them to every pole, every bulletin board. I waited at train stations, at bus stops. I searched every market, there was no trace. No one believed me. A single mother in wartime. No one thought I was respectable enough to be trusted. She paused for a moment. Looked down at her hands. And then, because I no longer had a child with me, I was removed from the resettlement program. I just sat there, not moving. The room around me faded into nothing. All that remained was the screen in her face, lined, worn down by decades of living with loss. I don't know if I cried. I just know that my chest tightened like someone had pulled the rug out from under me, and I had nothing left to hold on to. They didn't take me because they loved me. Not because they wanted a child. Not out of kindness. They took me, a 5-year-old girl with no voice, no documents, because I was their ticket out. I was the legal shortcut. I was the requirement. A biological commodity. Linda once said they rescued me. Now I know, they didn't rescue me from war. They rescued themselves. By stealing me. The first time Anastasia and I met in person wasn't at an airport. There were no tearful hugs under golden light. It was at a police station. Between gray-painted walls and the stale smell of old coffee, I signed the statement, my hand still shaking even though I had read every word a dozen times. Anastasia wore a navy blue coat, simple but neat, like she was trying to appear strong, for both of us. She placed on the desk a carefully preserved stack of documents, an old birth certificate copy, a refugee application, a smudged flyer with a photo of me at 5 years old. Underneath it read, Irina Ivanova. Missing since November 1995. Last seen with an American couple named Linda and Robert. The police had no more doubts. With the edited photos, matching testimonies from Ethan and me, and immigration records aligning perfectly, a case was opened within a week. No press. No cameras. Just the heavy silence of a truth too clear to deny. Linda and Robert were arrested at their home. Police said they didn't resist, just stayed quiet. Linda had packed food for the trip, as if she was still clinging to one final act of civility. Robert said nothing. When they were taken from the suburban Chicago house where I had lived for 27 years, no one came outside. The neighbors didn't know. No one suspected that the woman who planted yellow chrysanthemums by the front steps was someone who had once kidnapped a child from halfway around the world. They were charged with international kidnapping, falsifying citizenship documents, and federal immigration fraud. Over the course of a nearly 3-month investigation, every piece of evidence lined up: the altered photos, the Serbian passports never destroyed, the fake birth certificate, and the fact that they had hidden me from every government system throughout my childhood. There was no public trial. They accepted a plea deal. Convicted. Stripped of their U.S. citizenship. Permanently deported. No appeals. No return. No chance to explain themselves. As for me, I didn't feel relieved. There was no sense of victory. I didn't collapse in tears. I just felt confirmed. That feeling when the world looks at you and says, yes, that happened. And no, you're not crazy. For me, that was enough. Hannah stayed. She was born here. An American citizen. She had nothing to do with their crimes, except that she was the only person who ever watched me grow up close enough to see it, and still somehow never touched my loneliness. We didn't talk right away. In the first few weeks, she sent a few short texts, just to check if I was okay. Then one day, she knocked on my door, no makeup, hair a mess, carrying nothing but the weight in her eyes. She didn't apologize. She just said that was really messed up. I nodded. No other words were needed. We started over. Slowly. No rush to become the kind of sisters people post about. But she knows I take my coffee black, hate peppermint candy. And I know she twists her hair with her fingers when she's anxious. Sometimes, that's enough to call someone family. 6 months later, my mother, Anastasia, the woman whose Russian lullaby once slipped into my dreams, officially moved to Chicago. She came through the family reunification program, a long and bureaucratic process that Ethan helped fill out, page by page, while I sent email after email to confirm the details. Her apartment was a 15-minute walk from mine, on the second floor of an old red brick building, with a bakery she opened downstairs, Pirojki and Company, hand-painted sign, the glass door always slightly ajar, filled with the smell of butter and rising dough. She said it reminded her of the small bakery she worked at as a young woman on the outskirts of Moscow, before everything fell apart. I often stopped by in the afternoon. We didn't always talk. Sometimes I just sat there and watched her knead dough, her hands moving carefully, like she was mending something very old. We didn't try to force the memories to return. We just kept living. My wedding to Ethan took place in early fall. The weather was impossibly beautiful, soft golden sunlight and just enough breeze for the dress to ripple gently in every photo. It was a small ceremony, only close friends and family. Hannah stood beside me, not as a perfect little sister, but as someone who had watched me grow up warped, and was now trying to help straighten the frame. Anastasia sat in the front row, wearing a deep blue dress, holding a small bouquet I had picked out myself. When I walked down the aisle, her eyes were wet, but she didn't cry aloud. Neither did I. We just looked at each other. Two people who had found each other again. Not perfectly. But truly. After the reception, when everyone had gone, Ethan and I sat on the steps outside the venue, still in our wedding clothes. He handed me a glass of champagne, and I stared out at the open space in front of us. Not to reflect on the past, but to accept it as something that could never be separated from who I was now. If you haven't subscribed to Family Ashes yet, do it now. Not because I want fame, but because there are truths in this world that, if no one speaks them, will stay buried as if they never existed. Now I want to hear from you. If you found out that you weren't who you always believed you were, that your entire past was a dream directed by someone else, what would you do? Would you have the courage to walk away from a warm, familiar home, just because you knew it was built on a lie? And if love came from the people who had stolen you, would it still deserve to be called love? I used to think the truth would come like thunder, like a dramatic movie scene. But it didn't. The truth came quietly, leaking through old photographs, through glances, through sentences no one ever explained. It doesn't break you in a single night. It wears you down from the inside, slowly, silently, and completely. And the lesson I've taken from all of this is this. Love cannot be the result of silence and manipulation. Family is not supposed to be the place that makes you stay quiet so you can fit into a story that was never yours. Sometimes, the person who truly loves you isn't the one who raised you, but the one who dares to look at you and say, I see you. You may forgive. You may not. But never let anyone else rewrite your life and then force you to live in it as if you never had a choice. Tell me what you think in the comments below. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person listening to remind you that you were here. And this time, no one gets to make you disappear.